Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for joining me today, Eric. Eric Ford is one of our esteemed professors from the University of Oregon who uses ExPrep consistently in his courses. And so, Eric, I will turn the floor over to you if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more and talk about the classes that you teach using ExPrep.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here. So I teach the large enrollment spreadsheet analysis class here at the University of Oregon Lundquist College of Business, and so that's large enrollment. The sections are 220 students, and I've been teaching that class for about 8 years now, and so I have a face-to-face class, and then I have the online version of that class, and the face-to-face version of the class, the students come in, they're in the large auditorium, they have their laptops out. We do a really brief PowerPoint just to kind of talk about what we're going to talk about, and then we spend a little over an hour just doing hands-on stuff. The students download a file, the same file that I've got up front, and we just work through Excel skills for about an hour. And then the course also has a lab section associated with it. And so every week the students show up in a smaller 50-person section to a lab experience on either Thursday evening or Friday. And we use that for an exam every week. And so that makes for a really nice progression where we learn skills throughout the week together. We practice them, so we learn the skills in the two Monday and Wednesday class meetings. We practice the skills in a Tuesday and a Thursday homework project that's on ExPrep. And then Thursday evening or on Friday, students take an exam on just that week's material that really builds off of those homework projects they've done. And so that's kind of the experience for students. They're just learning skills, they're practicing, they're being assessed on them, and then we move on to the next week. And we're on a quarter system, so that's 10 weeks. And so we cover 9 weeks of Excel and 1 week of Tableau. The Tableau I don't host on ExPrep because ExPrep really does Excel stuff.
Gotcha, gotcha. So, what was your course experience like prior to using XPrep? What were some of the issues or frustrations you were running into?
Yeah. So it's been a rough ride. Prior prior to taking over as the instructor for BA 240, I was involved in it for several years before that when I was an undergraduate student, and then when I was an MBA student. As an undergraduate student, I worked as a teaching assistant in this course, and then in my during my MBA, I worked as the graduate employee running those testing labs, and so and then it was that relationship that I had with my mentor, Dave Dussault, that used to teach this course, that made a natural progression when he was retiring and I was graduating with my MBA, that they offered me the job to teach the class. And so early on, when I was still just a graduate employee, we were moving through different technologies trying to teach this course, and so that would have been about 10 years ago. And so initially, what we were doing was we were just going ahead and using macros to run batch files, and that's how we would grade things. And that was and so what that meant is that in an exam that students were doing, there'd be specific cells that we would have set out, and we're like, okay, so you need to copy and paste your formula from here and put it over here, and then and then it has to be exactly the way we're doing it, because we're actually running a macro with a bunch of if functions that are grading your stuff. And that was clumsy, but it worked, right? But that's what we had. And so then one of the big publishers pitched us SimNet, and this was the first of many big publisher solutions that we tried to work through. And so SimNet was so bad that within 6 months of using that, our grading system collapsed. And so we had, these are large enrollment courses, so we've got 440 students, two sections of BA 240 running, and then the grading was so bad that we were just being overwhelmed by student concerns. So because every day there would just be 100 students saying, hey, I was graded down for this, what's going on with that, right? And so we had, as an emergency response, we had to go before the committee that makes rules for our college, and allowed us to move the course to a pass no pass from graded, because we just could not. There was no logical way that we were going to come up with actual good grades for students that term. And so I immediately began looking for a replacement for that. And so I ended up looking at the two other publishers, and so it was Pearson that showed me their My IT Lab product, and that's what I ended up using for several years, because when I sat down with the sales rep and I talked about our problems, and I looked at their at what they had, I didn't like what they were showing me at all, but there was at least the flexibility that I was able to go in and edit the instructions that students were using. And so on Simulate, you couldn't even do that. You could not even edit the instructions that the students were doing. And so there's just a bad instruction, right? And that was causing one of these grading problems, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I mean, I asked them that. I'm like, so can I change this at all? And they're like, well, if you want to download them and print them, then you could like change them in Word. And I'm like, that's your solution, really? And so, like that's horrible, right? And so I'd be like, okay, well, there's 3 ways I could use this. Let me try and use it like this. And then and then between creating your own stuff with their clumsy project creation tool and then being able to write your own instructions, I was starting to approach being able to create custom content. And so that's what I did. But the custom content that I could create really only went so far, because I was still held back by the basic thing that you always do when you're working with a publisher solution, right? Is that the training materials are really plug and play, right? So you've got chapter 2 content, and the chapter 2 content is probably going to teach lookup functions and if function, right? That's probably what you're doing in chapter 2 of any of these publisher solutions. But across all of the big publishers, they really all follow the same kind of chronology. And so there's the week 2 material. They probably have like some training videos, and they probably have some some automated exercises and stuff. Those are not, you can't edit those at all. And so, but you may be able to kind of take those and plug and play and put them in different locations in your course and link them in different ways. But that stuff is not editable, right? Because they're videos, and they're automated training things, simulations, stuff like that. So you plug those in, and so then what I can do with the project creation tool, the custom stuff that I'm making, is still limited by. It flows from that. This is the students just learned it this way, and they practiced it this way. And so if I think that that's stupid, which I did a lot, I disagree with a lot of the way they were teaching this stuff, right? I'm still limited by that, because I don't want to confuse students with, oh, you learned it like this week, but this is how I actually want you to use it over here on the exam, right? So you can't do that. And so I was always limited by that, and that was that was frustrating. And so I used My IT Lab for several years, because at least I was able to go that far. And now My IT Lab was a seriously defective product. It was the best. It was the best that there was, but it was seriously defective. My end of it, I was able to learn. I was able to get good with that project creation tool. I was able to get really good at editing those instructions and making things flow as well as I could. But the website was still fundamentally broken. And that's just the kind of thing you run into with these legacy publishers that have been around. And these products are 20 years old. And what they do is they have their development team just cobble together some new patch every year. And it's just super obvious if you're a tech person at all and you start interacting with these things, it's just super obvious that they've just scaffolded stuff over stuff over stuff, and that the underlying tech is just way too old. And they just need to, make a serious investment in scrapping what they've got. And they just need to build something new. And they refuse to do that because it's expensive, and they don't want, and so, it was just a super buggy system. And really, so my lab staff, right, my graduate employee and the teaching assistants that work for me in that lab, really what that was for several years was just a My IT Lab troubleshooting team that really just dealt with the inherent problems of My IT Lab. And so they were just highly trained at working out the 20 or so bugs that would pop up for students in My IT Lab. And if I looked at, like, the student evaluations of the course, there were very few complaints about the course itself, and a lot of complaints about being forced to use my IT lab. But it was just the best that I had. I mean, it was so bad that I apologized for the software right in our first class together. Hey, this is, I've looked at everything out there. This is the best I can get for you. It is super buggy. I apologize in advance. And, it was that bad. And,
Wow.
so that really led me into ExPrep then.
Yeah, that sounds like a very frustrating experience, especially with so many students. I mean, hundreds of students a semester, that's a lot to manage. And then to have to manually fix grades and do all of the email responses and apologizing, that's a lot. That's a lot. So I definitely understand what the problem was. I definitely do. So now here comes ExPrep, and you're introduced to ExPrep. How has ExPrep changed that experience and those issues for you?
Yeah, so it's been a really fundamental shift because XPrep has allowed me to create all of my own content, and so there's no limitations. Well, there's very few limitations on what I can do with XPrep, and um, for the kind of thing that I do with Excel, where we're learning very specific skills. XPrep is a perfect tool for that. Obviously the next generation, the next iteration of XPrep that would be, that'd be fantastic, is more where things are more free form, and students can really maybe start from a blank workbook and really build out a model, and then have something actually grade that. And so that would be a beautiful next iteration. But right now it is just perfectly suited for what I need, and that is to tell students that, in this provided half finished model, we're going to use some lookup functions here. We're going to use some if functions over here. We're gonna do some data wrangling and get things into position and get data clean. And so that kind of stuff I can organize and have graded in XPrep with almost 100% accuracy. And so that allowed me to really take a step back and look at my course and be like, okay, so now that I'm free of this limitation of here's the publisher stuff and I'm going to build my course around that, now I'm just starting from square one. I've been teaching this course for 6 years now. What do I really want students to learn? And so starting from that point that I had with the project creation tool in my IT lab, where I was like, okay, this is how I would actually love to teach things, but I can't because of the stuff that came before it. Now I got to go all the way back to the beginning and be like, okay, so how do I actually want students to understand what we're doing? And so I've been able to, from the very beginning, have complete control of everything. And that meant that I could actually go all the way back to the beginning, which is Monday morning lecture. Maybe so week 2 is when we really start jumping into things in the course. And so on that Monday morning, when I start that demonstration, start teaching them skills, how do I want them to understand this stuff? And so I got to start right there. And so Monday's class, I teach them Excel exactly the way I want them to understand it, the skills for that hour. And then the Tuesday night homework that I've created, that on XPrep without limitation, I've been able to just go ahead and create that. I look at Monday's lecture and what 5 skills did we learn in that hour together on Monday, right? Okay, so those are exactly the 5 skills that I build out in the homework project. And so students are learning stuff with me on Monday, and then Tuesday night they're applying those skills in that practice that exactly models off of that class. And then on Wednesday, we do it again. And then the Thursday night homework is exactly modeled off of Wednesday's class. And then they walk into that lab exam at the end of the week. And that lab exam is exactly modeled off of those homework assignments that they've done during that week. And so a week's work is completely aligned now. It is exactly what I want students to take away from that week. And we do that for several weeks. We take a midterm, of course, and now this midterm is completely my creation, right? It's exactly at the skill level that I think my students should be at, and it's hitting all of the highlights over those 4 weeks that we've spent. And it's really based on those 3 exams they've taken up to that point on, week 1, 2, and 3. Here we are in week 4, and I'm building a custom midterm exam that exactly hits the highlights and the skill level that I think all of those students should be at. And so it's just, it's just a revolution in my ability to build a course for my students that is at the appropriate challenge level for them, the appropriate pacing. And so it's really just freed me up to build what I always wanted.
To do more. Exactly. And that's the overall goal, is to free up your time in grading, so that you can do the other things that you love about teaching, is create more content, make sure that the content is up to date. And so you now have that space to do that. So when you talk about how you use ExPrep for your course, we customize things for professors based on what they need and how they want to use us in their course. Do you want to show us that experience, what that looks like on your integration, your Canvas?
Yeah, sure. Over on Canvas. Yeah, you betcha.
Yeah.
So I'll show you exactly what I was just describing. So here's class 2, right? Or week 2 rather, on Canvas for students. And so of course we're going to start probably where anybody would in an Excel course there, and we're going to start by looking at basic formulas and functions. And so in class 2, they'll go ahead and they'll download a file, and we'll do that together. And I'm going to teach them formulas, right? And so then Tuesday night's homework, yeah, you guessed it, it's called formulas, right? And so this is hosted on ExPrep when they click onto project formulas there. That is going to take them right there, and that's really interesting that project functions is hanging out right there. Not too sure how that happened. So we will learn formulas here, and then they will come here. When they click here, that'll take them over to ExPrep, and they'll do that perfectly grading custom project formulas that I've made there. And then over here on Canvas, I host the instructions and files. And so students have instructions that I've written, right? And that students have gone through over the last 4 years and written me and been like, I was a little confused by this. And I'm like, well, great, I'll get in there and I'll improve those instructions. And because I'm hosting the instructions on Canvas here, which is very different for me from these previous, it took me a little while, actually. I was like, oh, I wish you were hosting the instructions, right? But then I realized that this is actually much better for me, because here what I do is, I can host these written instructions, and I can also go ahead and have solution images so that students are never confused at what they're trying to build, right? And so they always get pictures of what they're trying to build. And that just works out really well. So they have the written instructions and those pictures there. They do it on ExPrep there. They get their immediate feedback. They get multiple attempts, and so between the written instructions, the pictures, and then the iterative feedback, and the excellent grading on ExPrep, they've had a wonderful experience here. They show up to class again, and we learn functions there. And then of course, on Thursday night, they do their project called functions. And they do that. And then, of course, at the end of the week, boom, exam 2, formulas and functions. And so they just have this, fantastic week that's built out. And it's just all aligned. It's very tight. It's very easy for students to understand. Every week is just like the week before. And so students figure it out in week 2. And then it's just this nice pattern that repeats and goes on throughout the term, and where we learn things one day. We practice it in homework, and then we're tested on at the end of the week.
And I love how you have your class laid out. It's very organized, very easy to follow. Students understand what's coming and what's expected. And so I love how you've done that. And I love that we're able to fit into those different aspects of in-class versus homework and versus exam. So that's awesome. Those are all of the questions I have. But before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share that we didn't touch on?
Well, so earlier, one of my complaints about the big publisher companies is just that they try to build themselves as tech companies. They really do. They actually use that wording these days, which is just absolutely a joke. Because their technology is super old. I get asked to review these things all the time, and I looked at something just a couple days ago, and I reviewed a product, and I wrote them back and I said, what about this product couldn't have been made in the 1990s? I mean, just you know, let's just talk about that for a second. What kind of technology are you using here, and you know, and why couldn't this have been made 20 years ago? You know,
Right.
which is a real compliment or a real complaint. And and so XPrep isn't like that, right? So XPrep is this new company built on new technology. It's, you know, and it's just really obvious, you know, when you look at it, when you look at an app that's 20 years old and you look at one that's 2 years old, right? I mean, it's just not even a fair comparison. XPrep is, you know, it's got this really clean user interface. You know, problems get patched like within a day, and you know, and it's just a clean user experience. And there's, you know, there are very few bugs to speak of in the entire thing. And you know, working with a smaller company, like I've had this experience twice now, and so both these companies I use right now, XPrep and this other small business simulation that I use in a different class that I teach. And working with a small company just has all sorts of benefits to it. You know, actually being able to get a hold of somebody and in real time be like, hey, you know what, I'm experiencing a problem, and they're like, we're on that, right? I mean, you know, and so you know, that, and then, you know, actually having a company actually take feedback, you know, in the early days of when I was working with XPrep, and they hadn't built out quite so many features, I'd be like, hey, you know what? Like, you know, this is kind of a necessary feature that, you know, that you see in other big publisher solutions, because, you know, it's a necessity for us as instructors. And they're like, oh, well, we'll build that then. You know, and so you know, and that's the kind of experience that I've had working with smaller, newer, real tech companies that understand technology, that have, you know, and that have the freedom of movement and the nimbleness to actually improve their product. And so that's just a huge difference working with XPrep. As you know, not only am I on my end customizing my content, but the XPrep, you know, team is hard at work customizing their product also on the other end. And so between the two of us, you know, we're doing really good work, and producing a really good experience for students.
Well, wonderful. Well, we appreciate your continued partnership. And we always love your energy and anything that you have as far as input and feedback for us. So we look forward to continuing to work with you. And I thank you for your time today.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me here. You betcha.
Thank you.